You might recall that a few weeks ago I looked at a fascinating endgame from the Chennai Olympiad between Kyobasa and Vaishali that culminated in this position. In fact, a very well known theoretical position. So this was the final move. Pawn on a7, rook in front of it, a very well known situation in rook and pawn endgames. And white wins with the move f6 check. And the whole point is, if the king takes, then the rook checks and pawn marches forward. If the rook takes, then the rook can simply move away and you get a queen. And if king f7, there's this well-known tactical trick. The rook comes here, threatening to make a queen. And after rook takes pawn, rook h7 check skewers and wins the rook. So very well-known theoretical position with this move f6 check. Now, I had some very nice feedback after this video, and there was a request to look at some more endgames. And I was, as an extension to this, I was looking through my old copy of Rook Endings by Levenfish and Smyslov. Now, this is a great book. I think I got it when I was 12 years old. That's proper chess literature. Great book. You can see it's kind of a bit battered, well thumbed. Anyway, I was looking through it again and found a fascinating position that is connected with this. So here we go. This is a game between Gyula Kluger and Bela Sandor from the Hungarian Championship in 1954, taken from the book. Well, you can see the outlines of the game we've just looked at. White has this passed a pawn with the rook in front of it, and there's a passed f pawn as well. This one's a little bit different because black has this h pawn for counterplay. But very similar ideas. So it's black to play. How does black save this position? This is absolutely brilliant. Fascinating position. But actually, quite a typical position. So black to play. You have a little think. You can always pause the video. Black to play. How do you save this position? Cheers, folks. Well, the first thing to note is that if black makes, let's say, normal moves, then black will simply lose, as in the Kyobasa-Vaishali game. For example, if the king drops back, pawn advances to a7. I mean, this is obviously very passive, but f5. And, okay, you don't play f6 straight away because it's check, but you just move the king to the side. And then on the next turn, f6 and wins as before. Well, what about advancing the h-pawn to get a bit of counterplay? If the pawn goes forward, the king comes to cover this pawn. And it makes no difference to the position at all. Basically, white is about to win with this move a7. So king g7, a7, followed by advancing this, and the f-pawn and the king simply blockades the h-pawn. White is completely winning again. So normal methods don't work. Black needs something special here to save the game. And Sandor found this with king f5. Now black needs to play very actively here. So a6, the threat is simply to play a7 and then to check with the rook, and that is that. That would be winning. Rook a3 check. King has to go backwards. Now, if king takes pawn, then a7 just wins for white because there's no defense. The black king has no cover. There'll be a rook check and the pawn goes home. But here's where it gets Very tricky and very clever. Black played king g4. a7 with the threat to play rook g8 check. Rook a2, so white's king has to go backwards. Now, there's actually more than one way to draw, but let's look at what happened in the game, because this is spectacular. Okay, I'll leave it to you for a moment. How would you play here with black? Black to play. King f3 was played. So you can see that the f pawn shields the king. So there's no check on the 8th rank. And if f5, then black draws with rook g2 check, and the rook comes all the way back. Very important that the rook keeps an eye on the a pawn, so the white rook still can't move. And if f6, then rook f7, and once again the king is shielded, there's no check on the 8th rank, and actually that's just a draw. The king, well, in this case the king can come back and simply take the f pawn without any risk. So let's come back here. So instead of f5, king h1 played. This is very tricky. The obvious way for black to play is to check and keep checking. But in fact, and that threatens mate, but in fact now the king escapes. Can take this or possibly support the f pawn as well. And if rook a2, yeah, just king takes h5. Remember, this can never be taken because of check, and then the pawn goes home. So the obvious rook a1 check allows the king to escape up the board, and white will actually win. So this next move is absolutely crucial. What is black's next move? h4. f5 looks really scary. Again, checking does no good at all. But there's a very clever idea that black now has. Black to play and draw. King g3, which looks crazy because it allows a check. Remember, there's mate threatened, so white has to react. And here is the big trick. If white plays to get a queen, then black draws. How does black draw? Well, first of all, not by taking, because rook takes rook, and white's just a rook up. The draw is this. Rook a1 check. Brilliant. And if queen takes rook, it's stalemate. Oh, and by the way, if the rook comes back to g1, then you can play rook takes queen, and that's a draw. Fantastic save. So queen and rook a1 check, stalemate. That's why the king shuffled across to h3. Now that's brilliant. So king h3 played. So white tried as a last gasp king g1, hoping perhaps after rook takes pawn to support the f pawn. Even that's a draw, but there is a very neat way to draw this position immediately. And once again, it involves stalemate. Rook g2, and here the players called it off. So it's check, and if rook takes, once again, it's a beautiful stalemate trick. Lovely pattern. Black king has no moves. It's a draw. I just love the imagination that black showed there. I mean, this is just like a study, and this happened in a real game, as a repeat, Hungarian Championship 1954. Absolutely brilliant. Let's just have a quick recap. So the king comes in front. Very important. The king comes in front of the f-pawn, so it's shielded from checks. And now this brilliant idea, the h-pawn comes forward. That's absolutely necessary. And the king hides on h3. So if here, then this, and that is the stalemate trick. Absolutely brilliant. There is another way to draw, actually. Coming back to this position, let me just show you this. Instead of playing king f3, this is far less spectacular. Instead of king f3, rook a1 check actually draws. Keep checking. You check the king away, so now the king is a long way from the h-pawn, and actually you can take this pawn now. And black just gets there in time. Here's a very important moment, actually. Check, and you put the king on f1, and that draws. But, well, yeah, that still involves some precision, but this idea with king f3 and stalemate is something really special. There you go. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching.